Hi everybody, welcome to class 11. This is the class where we'll have page layout with CSS, and it's chapter 16 in your text. Now, in the past few lessons we've been building something. We've covered margins and padding, we've done the float, we've talked a lot about structural elements, block level elements versus inline level elements, and now we need to start to put it together. This will help build the layout for your final project. So, as far as your strategies for desktop, a fixed layout would be a fixed width regardless of the browser size. So when you have a fixed layout like this, you're going to depend a lot on media queries for tablet and mobile. And if you want to do this, it's fine. It is what it is. But if you want responsive design, that's where we read the width of the device, it's the same code base, and then we throw up the layout that fits that resolution, that width. Now there's adaptive design too, where you have actual literally different layouts for different or different code bases for different devices. Well, pixels is fine, but especially when you're learning, like in this class you can do it fine, but when you move forward you definitely want something like that's either elastic or hybrid, and we need to look at examples for this. So the fluid liquid layout is what you're going to want to do for this class, but you want to have fluid with an elastic layout, because the elastic means it resizes proportionally based on the text size. Since text is your content, it's basically your product that you're selling. That's going to take a priority. Now, a hybrid is going to be a combination of fixed and fluid, and most students in this course end up they'll do fixed widths, fixed metrics with pixels first, and then once it comes time to add mobile to it, that's when they will combine fixed and fluid. So here's a typical layout. We've got a div ID wrapper. Okay, we've got a header and a couple of sections. Those sections that you see before you are wrapped inside that wrapper. And I've been mentioning this in my past few lectures, how you probably usually have a wrapper. So let's take a look at the CSS for this. The wrapper itself has a width of 960 pixels. It's centered. It's going to be centered in the browser. So if the browser is 1200, then it would be 120 on each side for the margins. So margin left, margin right, auto, always, so it's centered. Then the left here is, again, it's a section, so it's a block level element. And the left is floated left, and it's with the 200 pixels, and the margin left is 200 pixels for right. And in this case, the left and right will float. So this is a typical layout, and you can imagine what the footer would be. So this right here is a fixed layout with a full width header. So we've got our header, we've got our wrapper underneath, which is the content, and then we have the two sections as before. So the header's up top, same CSS as before, except this time we have body margin 0. So around that body, for all elements, it's going to be 0. Now remember, only left and right is inherited. So basically we're zeroing out the margin for the body tag. Now if you look on Chrome, for example, it's an automatic 8 pixels on either side for a margin, and this zeroes that out. Okay, as far as fixed layouts, super easy, very predictable, and very common. Disadvantage is the horizontal scroll, but you will always you should actually disallow a horizontal scroll as a reset. What I mean by that is at the top of your CSS, just do X-axis overflow, none. Just disable it. And the other disadvantage of fixed layout is there's going to be a lot of extra space on something like an Apple TV. Now, you pay me to hear some industry advice, and I can tell you that most firms, if they have a decent revenue stream, they usually show their clients your work on like an Apple TV, something 50 inches or above. And this is something really to take into account, because if you're launching a site and you don't know this, your client will be in a conference room and they'll see their work on an Apple TV and it'll be right in the middle. So that's a major disadvantage of modern web development, especially in the corporate world. All right, this is a fluid layout. And in this case, we have an empty wrapper with no default width, so it's going to default to 100%. And then we have left at 25% and 25% and right at 75%. So instead of a fixed metric, because these are proportions, a percent, this will be fluid. And you can go ahead and look at the layout examples that are in this week's folder and see examples of this. So you can scrub the browser width, and you'll see that the fluid layout reacts to it. Now, this is another example of fluid width, but with a width of 80 on the wrapper. So you have a centering point. Okay, so the wrapper is taking up 80%. There's 10% on each side. There's a gap. And we still have the same issue with the float left for the left and right content columns. All right, this is fluid layout using min width and min max width rather. So we've got the same 80% layout on the wrapper, but we have a min width of 800 pixels in the wrapper. What does that mean? Well, what's going to happen is when we reduce to below 800 pixels, we will be in tablet mode, and that's where the wrapper will not have that width anymore. The wrapper will default to 100%. And the max width is at 1600 pixels. So what happens when the width goes past 1600 pixels? Well, if it's an Apple TV and you're showing your client, it's going to go to 100%. So these are just, we're adding to the same concept, but allowing for changes on smaller than 800 and greater than 1600. Now, fluid layout, pros and cons. Advantages, there's never horizontal scrolling because the width is always a percentage. Also, the browser window is usually filled, unless you do the 80%, but it's going to be filled with something because the default is going to be 100%. The disadvantage, well, what happens is that you might have long lines of text with this. So let's say you reduce the size of the width of the browser, the text will push down. The other disadvantage is it's too cramped or too much space and less predictable. This is why we have what's called media queries, and I've been hinting at it for a while in this course. That's where we're going to target different CSS for different phone sizes, different device sizes. Okay, so this is a good example of fluid width, and this is W3. And they're using a 3-column layout, and you see that on the right, it just adapts. So the W3 actually is, I believe it's responsive now, but this is taken from when it was just fluid. So the liquid layout will always fill the browser window because it's 100% width. And the content will reflow when the browser windows and columns resize. So you have that problem that we mentioned in the last slide about text length and how the space will be very constricted. So what I would do in this case on the right is just clear the floats and then have 1 column or 2 columns. Now, elastic layout, pros and cons. This is about the text inside. When you hear the word elastic, the text needs to adapt to the size of the screen. So the text would scale with the width. And that's why it uses EM widths. Now, if you recall, the EM value for text size, it is a proportion of its parent element. So you have to test this a lot with different browsers, but what you would do is go into Chrome. Let me show you something here. I'm going to take a little break, and I'm going to pause. I'm going to CSS Zen Garden, and this is iPad Pro. And what I did was I looked at the developer tools and selected these devices, and I just wanted to show you what it looks like. So this is, at this point, it's completely responsive. Everything's centered. But I'd like to point you two in the direction of at what point does it become 2-column. So right here, if you look, you're seeing the width at the top. And it goes 2-column right about 1048, I think. Yeah, right here. It's 1, 2, and for some reason they chose 1130. So that's when it becomes 2-column. But what's beautiful about this is that you can actually mess with a lot of things about it. In fact, you can make it offline, mid-tier, low-end mobile, see exactly what it looks like. So you can always go landscape or portrait like that. Anyway, that is a tool that I would use to check these the layouts out. Now, if I go back to our presentation, again, it uses EM widths. The text will scale, and we can predict the line height and width. Disadvantage is not useful for images and videos. Well, it can be useful for images if we make the images responsive, and that means having a height of auto and a width of a margin or a width of 100%. And it's not that complicated to do. For my videos, for elastic layout, I would use bigvideo.js. It's a JavaScript framework. probably for a more advanced class, but BigVideo.js will allow you to have responsive video. All right, this covers hybrid layout, and hybrid layout is exactly what you see before you. You see a fixed column that's a must-have, a gap of 25, and then a column that has a percentage width. So this is resizing based on the side here. It's commonly used with fixed width column and a percent column with a percent wrapper, which is exactly what makes sense. But there are really no disadvantages as long as you test it and work with it. All right, let's go to, now we've covered layouts. Let's talk about outline, because the outline property will add a border but does not add to the width of a layout. So we've talked about this before, about 4 meetings ago, where we have borders and border styles that would add to the width. But with the outline property, I'm mentioning it because you want to see the layout structure instead of the border property with your layout when you want to visualize it. And this is what I recommend. If you want to see like the wrapper, just add this and then you can comment out when it goes live. In this case, it's an outline with the 1 pixel, solid red, and the shorthand is at the bottom. So what's going to happen in the future? Well, we're using grid systems right now. Their latest release on this text was spring of last year. These PowerPoints are slightly older, but we're deep into grids now. If you go to ballastpoint.com, you'll see the layout of Foundation. I used Foundation for that. If you go to any of these, they're either going to use Bootstrap or Foundation or Skeleton, and that's responsive design. So you'll see columns, and basically you will have what's called a 12 grid column, and the 12 grids will be one page. So that's, we'll get into that, but the future is frameworks, multi-column layouts that are on desktop, Flexbox, and Grid. So you'll learn both Flexbox and Grid inside here in this course. All right, this is an example of a 3-column fluid layout. And what we have here is a float left. We have a main, a links, a main, and a news, okay? And the source order is header, links, main, news, and footer, left. So when we look at this, the reason that left image is there is to show what the logic is for mobile. But for desktop, it's going to be 3-column fluid, meaning everything's floated left, the links, the main, the news. And then what will happen is the footer will clear left, so the footer will be a full column. So what's going to happen is we're going to clear the float on links, main, and news for mobile. And that would be the media query, which I keep talking about. We will get to it. So if you look at the links itself, it's remember the margin has 4 sides, so the top, right, bottom, and left. So the left is 2.5%. So if you look at the margins here, you can see that the margins top and bottom 2.5%. And on news, it would be top right, so it's right percent. So this is a nice 3-column fluid layout, and you know it's fluid because it's always percentages. Now, this is a negative margin trick, and what we're doing here is, if you look at the links aren't in the proper source order. They're literally, the HTML will load wrapper, header, and main, news, links, footer. As you see, links are at the bottom. So what you can do is have floats, which we've done, float left, but if you have margin left minus 960, it's going to margin the width of the wrapper because the wrapper is 960. And then your links can appear to the left. All right, this is an example of a background image in columns. And what we have here is, and this is in the book, but think about the usefulness of this. If we have a wrapper that's 960, okay, and that image has to be 960, that it needs to be that way. And it's, in this case, it's background repeat Y, and that's because it looks like it has a gradient on the left. This is going to be an issue for things that are not anything that's less than 960 pixels, because that's a fixed width of 960. So it's fine to know how this works, but because the image is going to have green on the right and the tan on the left, followed by that gradient on the far left. But think about if your wrapper or your browser window is less than 960, it's going to be awful. All right, this is an example of fake or faux columns. This is covered in page 396. And you have a div ID inner here, where you have section ID left, section ID right. Now, if you look at inner, you've got background color aqua, which is the blue. Okay? So if you look at this, inner background color aqua, you'll see that it's creating the image of a fake column. It's making it look like there's a fake column, but there isn't one.